All right, welcome everybody. And we're going to just go ahead and jump right into the swing of things here. And get started. Now, in terms of 1031, 1035 exchanges, there's a lot that goes into that. But one of the things I like to do when we're dealing with a more complicated and technical concept is to ground that in the larger world around which it exists. And so when it comes to whether you information reporting, whether you have to, and the tax implications and the reporting implications, which hopefully we don't forget can be different things, it's important to understand that when you're looking at Internal Revenue Code requirements, this is the world that you see on the slides in front of you that we're working within. And that's dependent on, obviously, if we're paying U.S. persons or non-U.S. persons. And like today we're focused very much, not so much on the payee, but on the payment type. And so the types of the transaction, the types of payments, and those unique requirements that follow from there. Now, a couple of things here. One of the things I want you to focus on as we go on today, you're going to hear a lot of different code sections like the ones you see in front of you on the slide. And even though the code sections are what you absolutely need to know and base the foundation of your compliance and reporting decisions upon, obviously they're not very easy to understand. That's why you're here. And on the other hand, there's other forms of IRS guidance out there that can help in these situations. So when you look at like a 1099 situation, you have, for example, treasury determinations and revenue procedures and things like that, and instructions that help. And there's a huge, heavily settled area of law that's backing that as well that you can refer to. It gets trickier, though, with these types of issues where there's not such a great pool of information out there to help. And so what happens is that's where past practice comes into play, or for example, people like me who do this on a day-to-day basis and work with the IRS on a regular basis and establish some best practices and tips that help you out in these situations. And so we're looking more toward that today, and we're leveraging more, for example, my experience and my expertise in these areas. Otherwise, know that outside of these areas, for example, if you get into 1042, 1042S reporting, 1099, W-2, other types of reporting, or potential tax and withholding situations, that there's guidance out there. But again, as you see here, it can be, it can be pretty obtuse. So I want you to always try to find someone or a source where you can delve into the material in a simpler level, more of a plain English level. That's what I try to do. Something else I do, if you haven't attended one of my webinars or seminars before, I'm not a slide reader. I use the slides as an outline, but I do follow along and try to move down the bullet points in order. And everything we're doing also comes in under a framework of the tax gap. And the last thing on this slide before we move on, I just want to mention that the IRS currently is taking in about $450 billion a year less than what it should be. And a big part of that gap is the lack of reporting, for example, that could be done by third-party payors or situations like what we're talking about today with like-kind exchanges. And so that's one of the reasons why the IRS tends to target organizations such as yours and departments such as yours, because they're trying to close that gap by leveraging the reporting things that they believe the reporting they think you should be doing, whether or not that may be fair or not either. Fairness is not a concept that flows well with what the IRS does. And to be fair, I mean, they're a large organization. They have their problems and they're not always perfect. And we see that quite often. And so we're going to talk about some of those things that can help or hurt, depending on the perspective, as we move forward. And so one of those things, and by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you how much the law has changed over the last few years. And so before we get into all these details of what's new and what you need to watch out for, There's been a whole slew of new information reporting forms that have been released this summer. For example, if you're making payments that are 1099 reportable, or to non-resident aliens, non-U.S. persons with U.S. sourced income on the 1042, 1042S. All of those withholding certificates have been updated, particularly the forms W-8 and also the W-9, which I'll talk about in detail in a moment because that directly impacts what you're doing here more so than the W-8 world.